Ceann Comhairle. Minister, thanks for taking the question this evening. I'd like to discuss with you the use of cash in the purchases of property, including small parcels of land and sites. And I suppose I'd just like to highlight the importance in evaluating, controlling and monitoring of these financial transactions, with particular attention given to high value and cash transactions. Before I continue, I want to pay tribute to the agency of the state tasked with the control of illegal money and money laundering. The Criminal Assets Bureau, the MLIU, the Money Laundering Investigations Unit of Garda Síochána and the Revenue Commissioners are leading the way on this, but more needs to be done. At present, there are some safeguards in place under the regulations of the Criminal Justice Act 2010 to flag cash transactions such as property service provider declaration and business risk assessment forms. However, land is being sold for cash and with no genuine account of where this money is coming from. In my own constituency over the last 2 years, I'm aware of at least 5 separate sites being purchased and under suspicious circumstances, and in most cases the vendors were completely unaware of who they were selling to. It has subsequently come to my attention that these sites are now being used for miscellaneous activities and outside the normal planning regulations. Auctioneers have sold 4 sites near Blarney and 2 near Grenagh to individuals with no connection to the area. The sites had no outline planning permission, and after sale a change of use has occurred at each site without planning. And the same endless saga of planning enforcement proceedings is instigated, which inevitably leads to little or no action. And this is happening right across Cork North Central. This irregular activity must be questioned, and in many cases the source of the money used to buy the land is unaccounted for, with cash being used. It behoves me to ask, why buy a site with no outline planning? Why buy a site if you're not going to build in it? And where is the money coming from in these transactions? The proceeds of crime have never been so high, and the use of cash remains the primary means of transaction for criminals and organised crime gangs. Where the rest of society is moving towards cashless transactions, this leaves legitimate people and business vulnerable. Genuine vendors are unaware of who the buyer is, genuine buyers are being priced out of the market, and the proceeds of crime are being washed with impunity. I ask that the Minister undertakes a review of the implementation of Section 38 and 39 of the Criminal Justice Act and promote greater awareness between stakeholders on the requirement to carry out risk assessments and keeping the vendor fully informed. Can I ask if you would keep me updated on how many convictions for money laundering have been secured over the last 2 years? Could I also ask that regulations would be examined to prohibit the purchase of property in the jurisdiction with a greater value of €5,000 without a tax clearance certificate? I think it's worth considering also that without outline planning permission, should a declaration of use by the vendor before the sale is concluded be provided. Unfortunately, we do find ourselves in a situation where a large number of criminals in particular in Cork are actually purchasing land, are currently subject of an investigation of the Criminal Assets Bureau. A number of sites have been reported to them and that they're ongoing. People from far afield, in the States and so on, being the registered property owners of land in terms of the land registry affiliation and the folio, but those people clearly don't exist and, as I said, are subject to examination from CAB. So look, there's a lot going on in this area. I know it's going to cross a number of departments, be it local government, be it finance and justice, but I just think that we need to talk about it here. We need to have an open discussion about it, and I suppose we need to come to some sort of conclusion in terms of how we keep records of these people and these potentially illicit activities.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. And on behalf of the Minister for Justice, I want to thank Deputy O'Sullivan for raising this matter, and I'm happy to clarify the Department of Justice responsibility in relation to land and property legislation. Now, you did mention a number of organisations, Criminal Assets Bureau, money laundering agencies, the Revenue Commissioners and the Garda Síochána, and you also mentioned local authorities. So, as you do rightly point out, this is an issue that can impact across various government departments. But the Department of Justice works to make Ireland a safe and fair place and inclusive place to work, and as such our responsibilities include overseeing services for the buying and selling of property, namely conveyancing and probate legislation. The Property Services Regulatory Authority is the independent statutory body tasked with responsibility for licensing and regulating property service providers, auctioneers, estate agents, letting agents and property management agencies, some of which the Deputy referred to in his opening comments. Under the Property Services Regulation Act 2011, any business or individual who provides a property service other than those who are subject to a similar licence of authentication scheme in another EU member state must hold a valid licence from the Property Services Regulatory Authority. The requirement to obtain a licence applies to the sale by whatever means of land, including houses, apartments or other buildings, the auction of property other than land, including animals and art and antiques, and the letting of land and accommodation, and to property management services. It is an offence to provide a property service without a licence. The licensing of property services providers is intended to protect the interests of the public in their interaction with property services providers by ensuring high standards are maintained and delivered. For example, licensees must possess specified minimum qualifications, have available to them professional indemnity insurance, and pay an annual contribution to the compensation fund. So, as part of its independent statutory remit, the authority has powers to investigate complaints of improper conduct made against licensed property service providers and to commence of its own volition an investigation into suspected improper conduct. It also has the power to prosecute unlicensed property service providers. So there's definitely key provisions in legislation in relation to complaints in this area. The Act does not provide that purchasers of a property be tax compliant or required to submit a tax clearance certificate as part of the purchase transaction. That's the essence of what the Deputy referred to here today. So you are not required to provide a tax clearance or a tax compliance certificate in order to complete the purchase transaction. Typically, the purchasers provide a booking deposit to an estate agent, approximately 1 to 1.5% of the property sales price. The booking deposit, having regard to the average house price, €350,000, will result in an approximate booking deposit of €5,000, which is held by the estate agent until the contract is signed. There is, however, no legal requirement for potential purchasers to forward a booking deposit to the agent and may instead forward it to the vendor's solicitor. The issue Deputy O'Sullivan raised refers to private third-party transactions engaging the services of a solicitor, matters for which the Minister of Justice has no responsibility. Tax clearance certificates and stamp duty payable when property is bought, gifted or exchanged is a matter for the Revenue Commissioners, and meanwhile the questions in respect of registered property and planning permissions come under the remit of the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage and its agencies, and the Property Registration Authority, Registered Property and on board Plenala dealing with planning matters. So, as the Deputy said, it does cover a lot of government departments, and I do want to confirm a tax clearance certificate is not required to complete a purchase.
Deputy O'Sullivan.
Yeah, Gormagat, and thanks for the response, Minister. Look, and I know that this is a difficult enough issue, and even I have to be careful with what I say. You know, I expected this kind of a response, to be fair, and I know that, as I said, it falls between a number of departments. But I suppose the crux of the matter is that somebody who doesn't have means in this country, that might not have means to buy an asset or to buy a site or to buy a property, at this present time is able to pay large sums of money, be it 70,000, 80,000 for a site or much more for a house, and they can essentially, you know, go to their solicitor or whatever representative is acting on their behalf and, you know, make a financial transaction far in excess of their means. And in this state, it's very difficult for us to track that, to trace that, where people are acquiring, you know, sites, land, buildings, and they clearly don't have the means to do so, not in a legal way. I think this is something that's worth examining, be it through the Department of Justice or whatever the case may be. Look, even talking to detectives in the Criminal Assets Bureau, like they would tell you that, you know, they have only the resources to deal with so much. But it's quite clear what a number of criminals are doing. They're purchasing land, they're hiding money, they're money laundering effectively. Many of these are currently subject to investigation and doing their best to hide, you know, the resources that they have, all in the hope that, you know, when their investigation with CAB does conclude, that they can go back on their merry way and carry on with their illicit activity or whatever the case may be. And obviously this has come to our attention on a number of occasions in Cork, and Deputy Gould and myself would have met with people who are affected by this. And I'm hoping that in the coming months, when CAB does do their investigation, that these people will be held to account. But I do think that this merits further scrutiny from government to come out.
Minister to conclude.
Thank you, and I want to again acknowledge the remarks made by Deputy O'Sullivan here in highlighting particular issues of major concern to many people in many locations throughout the country. So I want to put on record one or two additional points which I didn't make in my opening remarks. I was speaking specifically about tax clearance certificates, but this is very important. A PPS number is required for a deed to be stamped before the transaction can be completed. PPS number must be provided. So there's various ways that can happen. If somebody has a legitimate PPS number, that PPS number goes in the stamp deed to the Revenue Commissioner, and the Revenue Commissioners have authority to follow that in relation to where the funds for the transaction came. So if there are particular cases, it's a matter that the Revenue Commissioner has the authority to follow up, and the information in relation to every stamp deed in the state has a PPS number. Now, I do want to say many of these PPS numbers can be obtained properly and appropriately through the solicitor who's involved in the transaction. So I'm assuming every solicitor does the job correctly, but they can get a client ID service in a matter of a couple of weeks to complete the transaction if the purchaser doesn't have a PPS in the first place. And this can happen in two cases. Let's say, for example, somebody has a PPS number in the state. It might be from England, or they might be from the States or somewhere else, and maybe property has been left to them by a long-lost uncle and they've no connection with the state, or maybe they're inheriting it from their parents and they've been abroad and don't have a PPS number. They can apply for a PPS number here in Ireland, wants to produce photo ID, birth cert, passport details, etc. And in relation, if a business is buying it from abroad and they're not incorporated in the state, they must get a certificate of incorporation, which can be done through the solicitor, and the directors will have to apply for a PPS number in respect of that transaction as well. So in every one of these cases, there is a PPS number that the Revenue can follow if they have grounds for believing there's something to follow up. You don't require a tax clearance certificate in advance, because I've given you a case of people from abroad might not have had any engagement with the Revenue Commissioner, but they will have a PPS number from now on in relation to all these cases.